On today's Agent Leader podcast, I'm going to discuss a fundamental shift that has helped many agencies move from pretty good to great to their best version possible. And it's a shift knowing that although goals are important, the focus, the extreme focus, should be in something else. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome into the Agent Leader Podcast. This is the podcast for insurance agency leaders to learn, to grow, to develop, hopefully have a laugh maybe along the way, and ultimately become the best version possible. My name is Brent Kelly. I am the host of the Agent Leader Podcast. It's my pleasure to be with you and hope you're doing well out there in the insurance agency leadership land that you're living in. I know there's so many things happening, so many changes going on. As I record this, we are into a new year, 2025. But regardless of when you listen to this podcast, whether it's the beginning of 2025, sometime later this year, or gosh darn it, maybe somewhere in the future, I think it's safe to say that goals are important, right? To have established goals, whether it's for the agency, for your department, if you're an individual producer, what are your specific goals? I don't think there's any argument that goals are important, but I do believe this. In fact, this is the purpose and the theme of today's podcast content, is that if we have goals, yet we have not defined specific standards to support those goals, our goals are simply wishful thinking. Right? It's just like having dreams. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Or couldn't I achieve that? Whether it's revenue or retention or agency valuation. I mean, you could pick any goal, any metric. Without standards, they're good ideas, right? Simply good ideas. So today I'm going to talk about the difference between goals and standards. And of course, both are important, but fundamental differences. And I'm also going to share some specific examples in 4 different areas to help you and your agency team think about this maybe in a different context. So if you're an agency leader and you're listening, there's going to be some things here of how can I help my team understand the difference? And of course, identify specific standards. If you're a professional, if you're a producer listening to this, the same goes for you individually. So this is true for teams or for individuals. Now, before I get into the content, I want to make a special note. In 2025, and I would say hopefully beyond, we are going to add some new things for this podcast. In particular, provide you, the listener, with downloads to tools or resources, something that may have been mentioned in this podcast. And we're going to make that available by going to sitkins.com/podcast. Pretty simple. Go to Sitkins, SITKINS.com /podcast. So go to sitkins.com/podcast. We'll put it in the show notes as well, regardless of whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening in one of our many podcast platforms. In fact, today I've got a resource or tool that I will mention, and it will be available if you go to sitkins.com/podcast. So check that out. Super excited to have that this year and give you, the agent leader listener, a specific tool or resource, and we'll build as we go here that you can download and access right away. I know when I listen to podcasts, and I listen to a lot, someone mentions something, hey, I would like to see that. I would like to have my hands on that. We will provide that through this podcast moving forward. All right, so let's get into the content. Goals versus standards. Great book written years ago. Most people know it. It's called Atomic Habits. James Clear wrote the book. Very powerful. One of the most popular nonfiction books written in the past many years. And James Clear has a great quote in the book. He's got many great quotes, but this is one of them. He said this: "You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems." Now, I'm going to change that word a little bit today and kind of change systems into standards because I think there's a lot of parallel. But it goes back to what I said in the intro, right? To rise to the level of our goals. Oh, what's your goal? Well, I got a big goal this year. Well, that's great. It's great to have some direction. It's great to have a place that you want to go to, but you're not going to rise just by having a goal. You're going to fall to the level of your system or your standards, I'll be talking about today. So what's the difference between a goal and a standard? Now, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but let me explain, in my view, the difference between goals and standards. Goals are specific outcomes you want to achieve. And generally, goals are external, right? Meaning there's some tangible thing externally that you want. Goals are specific outcomes that you want to achieve. I want to achieve X, this revenue, this size of book of business, this retention. Right? You name it. We can name any goal, but that's the goal. Important to have goals. By the way, we know there are some agencies and producers in particular that we talk to initially that don't really have any goals. They don't, we're just going to do better. So I think goals are certainly important. But here's the correlation and why the standards is so important to have with this. What's a standard? Well, a standard is a guideline on how to achieve those goals. A standard is a guideline on how to achieve those goals. So here's my goal. Well, what are the things specifically I need to do? And again, I'm going to give four different scenarios today on standards versus goals, particularly in terms of a producer. I think those are pretty easy to quantify and they'll be helpful for you as the listener. But overall, I'll just give you one example right now, right? You may have a pipeline goal. My goal is to have a pipeline in either my department, my book, that looks like X, right? This many people in my pipeline. Well, a standard is I've got a specific process or system to make sure that pipeline is being filled up every single week. So there is a difference. And again, we're going to get to some tangible examples of this. But I want to start off before I even get into those and just talking about establishing what we call at the Sitkins Group wins. WINS, establishing wins. I think we all want wins. Well, WIN is an acronym. I love acronyms. We love acronyms at Sitkins. Hopefully, this is an acronym that you will remember as a listener. But what does WIN stand for? WIN. What is normal? What is normal? Now, probably one of many previous podcasts, I've talked about culture because we know how important culture is for insurance agencies. Culture, my definition, our definition at Sitkins is the language and behaviors that are normal in your agency. The language, what people say, and the behaviors, what people do that are normal. So establishing wins is what is normal. Now, here's a shocker to all of you that are listening right now. Great performers make great behaviors normal. Good performers make good behaviors normal. Average performers make average behaviors normal. Poor performers make poor behaviors normal. And you can think about those in your agency today or think about yourself. Now, maybe you have a mix. Maybe you have some great behaviors and good behaviors and average behaviors and poor behaviors, but those all, in essence, are your standards, right? Based upon your behaviors. Now, one of the concepts that we continue to preach at the Sitkins Group is that our beliefs drive our behaviors and our behaviors drive our results. And too often, we see agencies and professionals skip the beliefs and the behaviors and go right to results. I want this result. Of course you do. But what are the core behaviors that are going to make that result predictable and in some cases even guaranteed? If I or we do these specific behaviors consistently, time and time again, and they become our standard of what is normal for me, our department, or our agency, we feel very confident that we will achieve our goals. Remember, going back to the James Clear quote, and I can rephrase this, you may not always hit the goal. There is not a guarantee, but you will fall all the way to your lowest level of standards, right? So part of this is understanding what are your specific standards. And of course, the beliefs, behaviors, results starts with what? The beliefs. Do you truly believe that these standards are important? Do you truly believe that these standards or behaviors will allow you to achieve your set goal? Because too often we see misalignment, that our behaviors don't really match the results we want. Our beliefs don't really match our behaviors, and we wonder why we're struggling. So for you as an agency leader, when you start to think about this, okay, what are the agency goals? What are the department goals? What would be an individual goal if you're leading or managing individual producers, or just yourself as a professional? And you go, okay, what are the results I want? What are the core behaviors that become my standards? And do my beliefs, does my mindset support those said behaviors? Because that is part of the standard as well. A standard is not just something you do, it becomes an identity to who you are. Let me say that again. A standard isn't just the thing that you do, that's the behavior. The standard holistically is also the identity of who you are. Now, I use a ton of sports analogies because I love them and I love sports. And I think sports are a great example in so many ways of business and life. But you think about some of the best cultures in sports, professional, collegiately, it doesn't really matter. The best cultures have high standards. And you'll often see people who have performed lower in the past suddenly become part of a new organization, a new culture that has absolutely defined standards. It doesn't say, hey, do this thing if you feel like it, do this thing if it makes sense for you. You do you. No, those great organizations say, this is who we are, and this is how we do things. I had a recent guest. If you didn't listen to the prior podcast, I've got a ton of interviews. I had Jill Wagner Kelly, and she talked about, even in terms of leadership, that one of the concepts that has been very powerful, if you're judged by your worst performer as a leader, would you do things differently? The answer for most people is, of course. Yeah, I got 6 people doing really well, or at least above average. 2 really have struggled for a long time. And you know what? That's just the way it is the way it's going to go. And they're going to flounder for a little bit. And we'll just see eventually if they figure it out. Versus, no, we have specific standards. And we and I want to help you achieve those standards and live up to those standards on our said culture and our organization. And if not, it may not be a good long-term fit. In fact, it probably isn't. Right. So that's why the difference of just saying goals and standards. And by the way, have you ever, as a leader, or you as an individual, ever had an assigned goal? You put a goal out there, you didn't really talk or think about it for a long period of time, maybe even a year. You got to the end of the year and you go, oh, didn't quite achieve that goal, but good news is next year is a new opportunity to fail at that goal as well. Ha ha. Right? But that's what happens because we haven't established the standards, the few basic things that are going to be critical for me to achieve the said goal. All right, said goal. All right, so I said I'd provide some examples. Let me provide a few because some of this may say, it's a bit abstract and goals and standards and whatever, but I really want you to think about your agency and do your standards align with your goals? Do you have standards? And if you don't, how do you expect to achieve your goals? And then I just hope we might, it could. I always talk about the 3 of brothers, should have, could have, would have. Right? That's what happens when you have goals without standards to accompany them. So let me provide a few examples. Now, these are producer predominant examples. Obviously, we work a ton with producers. We work with the sales leaders. We work with the agency leaders. We work with the service team professionals. We have all these conversations together holistically for an agency. But at its core, we want producers to succeed because producers succeed, the agency succeed and grows, and you could do more things. There's more opportunities, more freedoms. I think you probably know that. All right, so let me give you a few examples here. Here's a goal, and I've got to make sure I explain a bit of these terms because these are a bit Sitkinized terms that we use in our programs. Some of you might know our programs involved. Some of you may not. So if not, I want to give some context. But one of the goals that we have, or we would suggest that an agency has, is there is a weekly high performance team meeting between sales and service. So on a weekly basis, we proactively have conversations on key items, key areas, could be based on clients, could be red flags. What's the most important thing this week? We've got all kinds of resources and things that we share and how to communicate this at the highest level. But it's a weekly high performance team meeting. That would be a goal. Hey, our goal is we're going to do a weekly HPT meeting. That's a goal. Here's a standard. And again, I'm speaking from a producer standpoint, right? The standard is that every week before the next HPT meeting. By the way, we high performance team meetings don't have to be on Monday, but that's what we recommend, right? Before you get your week going, Monday you have a high performance team meeting. Here would be a standard. Before the weekends, for example, Friday, I'm going to make sure that I have reviewed the agenda for Monday's high performance team meeting, prepped my notes, and ready to discuss. Now that math sounds simple. But I'm telling you, in many cases, it doesn't happen, even for those agencies that are doing high performance team meetings. You show up and you go, okay, now what are we talking about? Where are we at? And you're distracted. And guess what you do? You annoy the service team professional. They feel like you're wasting time and you feel like you wasted time. You didn't accomplish and you had a pointless meeting. Right? So that's one example. Goal, we're going to have a weekly meeting. Standard, I will show up prepared, review the agenda, and ready to discuss before the meeting, typically the week before. And if you're having a meeting Monday, we're going to do that Friday. So there's an example of a difference between a goal and a standard. Here's another goal. Now, with our producers, if you've heard of the Sitkins group for a while, we talk often about a producer perfect schedule or producer peak schedule that consists of 10 appointments a week. Right, this consistent 10 appointments a week. If you listen to the podcast, we talk about this in terms of the green zone, producers getting in the game. And these are appointments with clients, future clients, and centers of influence, right? So every week, let's have 10 appointments with clients, future clients, and centers of influence. And I'm going to add a fourth one on here because it is part of the green zone, pipeline development or pipeline activity. Right, so I'll add a fourth one there. So there's four categories. I've got a meeting with a client, a future client, a center of influence, or I'm doing pipeline work that's scheduled in my calendar. And again, it could be a number of different things you're doing for pipeline development. That would be the goal. That's my goal. 10 appointments a week. More time in that green zone that I heard Sitkins talk about. Here's the standard. This is a difference. I'll just think about it. The standard is I don't end this week until I have my 10 green zone items already scheduled for next week. Well, gosh, Brent, I mean, what if I get to the end of the week and I've only got 2 appointments scheduled? Well, you better fill the other 8 with something that's green, right? Maybe it's a networking event that you missed and you forgot about. Maybe it's some reach out and relationship development. Maybe, like I just mentioned, it's pipeline work. In fact, for newer producers, I would say, I've only got 3 blocks filled. Good. Your other 7 are going to be easy. They're all pipeline development work because that's going to be super, super important. Right. But then the idea is, oh, my goal is 10. Oh, I didn't hit it. Now, next week I'll hit 10. Ah, I didn't hit it. Next week I'll hit 10. I didn't hit it. Next week. And again, you've got to have your own goal here. And some of you aren't familiar with the producer perfect schedule. It's fine, but just understand the fact that we're going to be intentional and proactive on scheduling appointments that get me as a producer in the game, AKA the green zone. That's the goal. The standard is I'm not going to leave that week until my next week is already done, that I'm showing up with a game plan and I've got a plan of action that I'm working from. How often do we see producers show up on Monday? Oh, okay, I got a sales meeting and a meeting here, and I better check some emails, and I got some responses here, and I think I've got an appointment on Tuesday, and then there's one Wednesday afternoon, and I think there's this event on Thursday morning, and then I don't know, by Friday I'll figure it out. And most of the week is lived kind of just reacting to stuff. You got a few things, but most of it is just busy activity things versus focused, productive work. I'm going to get a bit deeper in this area, but this is an example of the difference between a goal and a standard. All right, here's another example. Again, these are all, by the way, if you listen to this podcast and you had your producers do these 4 things as standards, man, it is absolutely transformation in your agency and with your results. Hey there, agent leader. Brent Kelly here. I want to take just a few seconds to remind you that now is the time to create your true best version possible agency. If you go to sitkins.com/book a call, sitkins.com/book a call, we'll get to know more about your agency, conduct an agency assessment, and provide your agency with a customized plan to help you avoid some of the pitfalls, frustrations, challenges, and roadblocks to get your agency to true ultimate freedom and become its best version possible. It all starts by going to sitkins.com/book a call. All right, so here's a goal. And this is typically, I wrote this down this way because this is typically what we hear. My goal this year is I'm going to receive more referrals. I'm going to get more referrals. I'm going to ask for more referrals. That's my goal this year. Because I know that getting referrals and earning referrals is absolutely a great way to write more business, which it is. We see this time and time and time again. When you get warm introduction and warm referrals and you've done things correctly, it's a much easier introduction. You're borrowing credibility. You start in a much higher, you close more, right? It just leads into more and more opportunities. And everyone knows this. Oh, but I don't do it. So the goal would be I'm going to earn, I'm going to ask, I'm going to receive more referrals. Here's the standard, right? Here's an example. Again, I'm going to use some of our Sitkins terminology, but I think you'll get it. all of my A and B clients, and the way we look at this is your top 20% of your largest clients. If you took all your book of business, your top 20%, right, pretty simple, top 2 out of 10, but the top 20% of my clients will receive a stewardship or promise report. Now, I may be using some terminology. Go, oh, what is that? I'll keep this super simple. My top 20% of clients all receive a stewardship or promise, which is simply a report back to the client on the things that we agreed to up front. Now, we have a whole process that we walk teams and producers through to do this very, very successfully. We also have a reverse referral process. There's a lot of process within this, but to keep this super simple for the sake of this podcast, a goal would be I want to get more referrals. A standard is every one of my top 20% of clients will receive a stewardship or promise report. And again, typically this is about the 6-month anniversary. It doesn't have to be, but about that to say, here's what we agreed to, here's what we discussed, here's what we've done, here's what we're doing, which not only makes the renewal less or a non-event, it also is the absolute, guess what, perfect time to ask for referral because you've doggone it earned it. And most producers and teams never do this. We find that most clients forget the stuff that agents and producers do. Oh yeah, you did do that. Why? Because they're busy running their own life and their own business. But if our standard is I will deliver a promise or stewardship report to every top 20%. Why? Well, because it's the right thing to do. It helps exemplify the work that we've done together and highlight some of the things. It provides positive feedback. It lets us know that we've got control of the situation and we're aware of market conditions or anything that's going on out there based in terms of their risk or their benefits plan. And of course, to get to the end, it proves the fact that we've earned the right to ask for referral. And of course, we're conversational and comfortable. So I'm going to get a little bit deeper on some of this, but I just want to give you an idea. The goal is more referrals. The standard is this is what I do every time. It's not, should I do it? Remember, I said that the idea of a standard isn't, well, I hope. It's this is what I do or what we do. It's our standard. It's non-optional. All right, let me give one more example before I wrap up this podcast. And I think I'm trying to be hitting home on some of these points because it's so important. And I'm hoping you're listening and going, gosh, do we have standards? And if so, or do we actually living up to those standards? Do we just name a few things? Is it really our identity or is it just a hope and a wish? All right, so here's the last one. And I'm just going to make up some numbers here, but the goal could be my goal this year, our goal is that we're going to have a 75% close ratio. And by the way, we have many agencies and producers that have 80% or higher. Why? Well, because they follow a specific process and they talk differently and they qualify people up front, right? But all that goes into it. 75% close ratio. Now, there's a lot that goes into that, but let me just take one idea and one area that you could have a standard to have a higher closing ratio. You ready for this one? I will prep and practice every presentation. Let me say that again. I will put time and effort into preparing at the deepest level. One of our Sitkins-ism is I will never allow someone else to be more prepared than me. They may be more experienced, they may be more talented, they may have more resources, but I will never allow someone to be more prepared than me. So I will prep, and here's the second part, I will rehearse/practice before every presentation. You know, every opportunity deserves your very best. A goal would be, I want to close more. I want to write more accounts. A standard is, I practice and prepare every single time. Now, it may vary by the type of client and the type of meeting you're having, but I believe to have a meeting, if it is important enough to show up and have a conversation with someone that you want to help move their business or their life forward, or it's a center of influence, that's a super important possibility for you to build your network or whatever type of meeting, even a carrier meeting, you best be prepared and practiced. You know, I say this all the time in our sessions with producers in particular, but really anyone in this business, is that communication is your number one skill. But too often we take that skill for granted. We just assume we are or we aren't great communicators, or maybe we'll just stumble along and get better. The best producers, and I'm using producers as an example in this, they prep, and rehearse every presentation. It's called low risk practice. They practice when no one's watching, right? The best performers in the spotlight are the ones that did things in the dark when no one was watching. Every time. And it's amazing how these are some examples of standards that our top producers that we have the pleasure to work with, they do it not because I wonder if I should practice or prep this presentation. It's I have a presentation on Thursday at 2 p.m. Where in my calendar will I make sure it's prepared and rehearsed and practiced before I go on that set appointment? It becomes a standard, right? And that's the difference between goals and standards. Both important. I hope you all have and set and you are working towards certain external goals. Without goals, it's very hard to have standards, right? To be fair. But if you focus on this is who I am, or this is what we do, and this is our identity, this is our standard, somehow those goals just seem to be more attainable. Right? It's all about the power of consistency in some of the core behaviors. And of course, I've talked about your standards. So, okay, I talked about at the beginning of this podcast. Before I wrap here, I want to make a note again. For this episode, one of the tools that I am going to include, go to sitkins.com/podcast. And again, sitkins.com/podcast, the tool that we're going to add in there. You go to that website, you put your name and email so we know who you are, and you're going to get this tool. It's our best version possible tracker. Why is this important, and why does this correlate with the content today? Well, because there are certain things, behaviors that you, and in particular, this is based on production or producers, that you can track that will make your success predictable and in many cases guaranteed if we do these things. So this tracker is going to have 6 items that are listed that we see the best performers do. Doesn't mean you're perfect at it, by the way. It means you're tracking it so you can measure it and manage it and improve it and make the course corrections week to week. You know, one of the things you think about, certainly happens with goals, is by the time you get your feedback or results from some big goals, it's already happened. That's why you have to start over again. We're a best version possible based on our book, Best Version Possible by Roger Sitkins and myself. A tracker allows you to go, gosh, I had 2 weeks in a row where I really got off course. I need to get back on, right? I've gotten a little off. Hey, that happens. The difference is, are you going to stay off course for the rest of the year or the quarter or whatever it is? Or are you going to say, okay, I can make that shift. I can get back on track. So go to sitkins.com/podcast. You will see the downloads. We'll continue to add these and grow these throughout the year and as we build these podcasts. But I want to give you all, the agent leader audience, something tangible that you can go take a look at. And by the way, if you have any questions on the tracker, want to learn more about what we do with agencies. We work with agencies that are growth minded and growth agencies. If you are a status quo agency or a good enough agency, I'm not trying to pick on you, but we are not in a good position to have a conversation, right? We're not gonna mesh for a while. But if you're an agency that goes, you know what? For example, there's some standard that I know that we need. We need some help. We need some third-party validation. We need to make sure that we're truly developing our people. And we've got a unique process we can put together and that we're communicating well internally and externally. All these things that go into it, that's what we do. We help agencies move from good to good enough to great to best version possible and get best version possible results. So again, we're here to help you. Reach out if you have any questions. But with that, I want to thank you for listening. If this podcast has provided value, I'm going to do the podcast thingy and say like, subscribe, share. I'm looking to grow this audience. Why? Because I truly want to help agent leaders and agencies become that best version possible. And this is a great place that, by the way, costs agencies $0. But I love doing it. I love providing value. I'd love to get feedback. And again, go to sitkins.com/podcast to check out the tools and resources. We'll talk to you soon. I wish you all the best in your success. Wait, you're still here? Hey, Agent Leader Podcast listeners, Brent Kelly again. I want to first of all thank you for listening to the Agent Leader Podcast and your continued support. If you would like to have more content come your way, please help us by sharing the podcast, subscribing to the podcast, telling people about the podcast. And if you as an agent leader are truly ready to take that next step in your agency, you're committed and want to be that best version possible agency, don't wait. Go to sitkins.com/book a call. Sitkins.com/book a call. We want to provide the blueprint for your agency to help you create more impact with less effort. And it all starts by going to sitkins.com/book a call. All right, now you can actually go. Thanks.